The light poured in through the wide corner windows, touching everything in soft gold. I stood barefoot in the tiled entryway of my new home, the keys still warm in my palm. 2 bedrooms, a walkout garden terrace, and that breathtaking view of the Cascades after decades of subletting, house-sitting, and fixer-uppers. This place was entirely mine. Clean lines, good bones, nothing to repair, nothing to negotiate, just peace. I wandered through each room slowly, fingers trailing along the matte quartz countertops and the deep walnut trim I'd picked out myself. My name, Lorraine Grayston, was on the deed, the utilities, the insurance, the HOA documents. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Not anymore. I sat on the edge of the bay window seat and looked out at the evening sky. The landscaping crew had finished just yesterday, ferns along the border, native lilac, and one perfect Japanese maple that would flame crimson in the fall. I had waited my whole life for this. The silence was so complete that the phone ringing startled me. Darren. I smiled as I answered. Hi, sweetheart. Hey, Mom. Leora and I were wondering if we could swing by for dinner. She wanted to talk with you about something before the move tomorrow. Of course, I said, still smiling. There's leftover lentil stew and some bread I can warm up. They arrived just after 6. Darren carrying flowers and Leora balancing a tray of matcha macarons. She was all charm as usual, tight bun cashmere shawl. Soft compliments about the light fixtures and kitchen tile. But her tone shifted over dessert. There's just one thing, she said lightly, brushing crumbs from her lap, about the second bedroom. My parents and Kalia, my sister, you remember, will be staying with us for a while. Just until things settle. I set down my spoon. With us, she nodded. We've already prepped the guest suite for them. They'll move in the day after you. I looked at Darren, but he was studying his teacup. Outside, the garden lights flickered on automatically. Inside, I felt something pull taut inside my chest. I said nothing. Not yet. I would sleep on it. And tomorrow, I would decide. I barely tasted my tea. The sweetness of the macaron sat heavy on my tongue, clashing with the bitterness rising in my chest. Leora, still smiling, leaned back, like she'd just mentioned something pleasant, like the weather or a neighbor's dog. Darren reached for another cookie, avoiding my eyes entirely. They've had such a rough year, Leora went on. My parents lost their lease unexpectedly, and Kalia's divorce has really taken a toll. We thought, with the extra space and all. She gestured around my living room as if it were already hers. As if every inch had been earned by someone else's need, not my labor, not my silence. You'll still have the smaller bedroom, she added brightly. It's cozy. I even bought some new linens for it, sage green, the kind you like. I kept my face calm. Sage green. She had picked out the sheets for a room I hadn't even slept in yet. Darren finally spoke. It won't be for long, Mom. Just until they get back on their feet. Back on their feet. I wanted to ask what exactly they had ever stood on. But I didn't. Not then. After they left, I stood at the front window until their taillights faded. The kitchen still smelled like rosemary and warm bread, but I had no appetite. I rinsed the mugs and dried them by hand, my mind moving faster than my hands ever could. By the time I slipped into bed that night, the house no longer felt like a promise. It felt like a lie that hadn't quite settled yet. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then I turned on my side, pulled the blanket up to my chin, and whispered into the quiet. This isn't why I worked. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. Rain tapped against the windows in slow, steady rhythm. I got dressed without turning on the lights, made a cup of coffee, and stood in the doorway of the guest room. The one they called mine. The one I had never chosen. By the time the sun rose, I already knew what I had to do. The rain softened by mid-morning, but I didn't leave the house. I wandered through the rooms again, barefoot quiet. My fingers brushed the edge of the kitchen island, the cool marble surface grounding me. Everything here had been chosen. Not for show, not to impress, but because it felt like peace. It was meant to be mine. And suddenly, it wasn't. I sat in the sunroom with a notepad, but the pen never touched the paper. Instead, my mind drifted not to Leora, not to Darren, not even to their families, but back to a girl in her 20s, hair tied in a knot boots, caked in mud, standing on a scaffold in the pouring rain. I had been the only woman on that crew. The only one with a degree, too. They used to call me Missy, or the planner, like it was a joke. But by the time the foundation was poured, it was my blueprint they followed. I built green spaces in schoolyards, plazas, for city halls and rooftop gardens, for buildings that didn't believe in beauty, until they saw what I could grow. I could have taken a partner role in Boston. I was offered it corner office team of designers. But Darren was 6 then. His father had passed 2 years earlier, and I remember staring at the contract and thinking, what good is prestige if my son grows up with cold dinners and missed school pickups? So I stayed, built smaller things, deferred dreams. I rented while others bought, saved while others spent, let my wants shrivel quietly so my son's world could bloom. And now, a woman who never saw a sunrise over a steel beam, who never poured her own coffee into a thermos at 5:30 a.m., thought she could claim the space I carved for myself. I stood and walked to the closet, pulled down a single box I hadn't unpacked yet. Inside was my ledger, the green spiral one I always kept at job sites. I flipped it open and pressed my palm flat on the first page. It was time to make a new entry, a different kind of plan. By sunrise, the decision had already settled in my bones. It wasn't loud or vengeful, just steady. A slow pivot toward something I had denied myself for too long: ownership of my own boundary. The first call I made was to the moving company. Reschedule delivery, I said. Indefinitely. The man on the other end tried to offer windows for later in the week. I declined. Next, the furniture. I redirected the deliveries to a private storage unit I had rented years ago when downsizing from the townhouse. It still had my grandmother's china in it. Now it would hold the things I had chosen for this next life, the life I would not be sharing. Utilities were paused. The gas and electric companies didn't ask why. Neither did I. Then I called Maya. "Now that's a voice I haven't heard in too long," she said. Warm but sharp, like always. "What's going on, Lore? I'd like to meet. Today, if you're free." She didn't ask why. "Come by at 3. I'll brew the good tea." Before lunch, I stopped by the house again. It was quiet, untouched, exactly as I left it. No one had moved in yet. No bed sheets had been unfolded. No groceries in the fridge. Just possibility. I sat cross-legged in the middle of the great room floor, ledger beside me, pen uncapped. I sketched a layout, not for landscaping this time, but for a quiet coup. I wrote down the names of all the people who had mistaken silence for surrender. Then I crossed out every single one. On the kitchen counter, I placed a single vase filled with artificial tulips. A plastic arrangement Leora had once brought over, saying it matched the aesthetic. Next to it, I left a single piece of paper signed, dated, and deliberate. Then I walked out, locked the door behind me, and dropped the spare key into a padded envelope. It would be mailed, not handed over. That afternoon, Maya poured Earl Grey into a chipped porcelain cup and slid a folder toward me. Inside was the first draft of something I'd never written before a formal declaration of refusal. Absolutely. Here is the revised Chapter 5 in English. With the logic corrected, the note is now placed visibly on the glass of the front door, making it believable within the narrative. Absolutely. Here is the updated Chapter 5 in English. With the corrected logic, the note is now placed in a firm envelope clipped to the door handle, so it is visible and physically accessible from outside. I didn't wait for a response. Once the envelope was mailed, the locks changed and the access codes revoked. I placed my phone face down and silenced it. Whatever storm was forming could wait. I had already done what needed to be done. They arrived the next morning on schedule, of course. Punctuality had always been one of Leora's proudest traits, though it often masked her need for control. From my car parked half a block away, I watched it all unfold. Henley and Dasha stepped out of a rented SUV Kalia, dragging 2 matching suitcases, and Leora directing them like a woman who believed the world owed her ease. They approached the front door with the casual certainty of people who believed they belonged. Then came the pause. The keypad blinked red. Leora tried it again, then again. She stepped back frowning as if the house might suddenly offer another entrance. Her jaw clenched. Henley squinted through the window. Dasha shifted uncomfortably near the porch swing lips, pressed in disappointment. Darren stepped out of the second car, hands in his coat pockets. Eyes down. He didn't look at anyone. He just stared at the keypad like it had betrayed him. Then Leora saw the envelope. It was clipped firmly to the front door handle, white-sealed, unmissable. She tore it open and unfolded the single sheet inside. I had printed it in bold 14-point Times New Roman. This home remains in my sole possession. No guests have been authorized. Entry attempts have been logged and reported. Lorraine Grayston. No anger. No apology. Just fact. I could see her lips move as she read it aloud. Then she crumpled the paper slowly, her fist closing around it, like she could crush what had already been decided. Darren glanced up the street. Our eyes met briefly. I didn't wave. They stood there a while, confused, exposed, their plans unraveling in plain view. And I, still warm in my car, finished the last sip of coffee and started the engine. Later that afternoon, Mr. Voigt from the HOA left me a message requesting clarification on several unauthorized occupancy claims. Mr. Voigt's voice was polite, but there was a sharpness beneath it, like a man trying to sound neutral while holding a lit match. Ms. Grayston, I wanted to confirm that you are still the sole legal occupant of 1145 South Briar Hollow. There seems to be a bit of confusion. I called him back immediately. Yes, I said. I am the owner. I've not authorized any cohabitants. Has someone submitted something? He paused before responding. Your daughter-in-law submitted an occupancy extension form last week, listing 3 additional adults as long-term residents. That raised a flag, considering the recent transfer lists you alone. I let the silence speak for itself. We've voided the submission, of course, he added. And, due to yesterday's attempted override of your access code, we've marked your unit for gate-level restriction. No digital entries without your approval. Thank you, I said. Please send me the list of names and any future attempts. The email came within minutes. Plain as daylight. Henley Mooncrest. Dasha Mooncrest. Kalia Mooncrest. All listed as extended family cohabitants. Leora had even included estimated duration of stay 6 months or until rehoming is secured. Secured, as if I were a temporary shelter. I forwarded the file to Maya. She called before I could reread it. I've drafted the occupancy limitation affidavit, she said. Want me to file it today? Do it. I spent the rest of the day pruning my peace lilies and tidying the apartment I still rented. The air felt cooler now, clearer. I checked the cameras once. No one had returned to the house. Just before dinner, my phone buzzed with a message from Darren. They're standing outside like they've been disowned. It's humiliating. I stared at it for a while before replying, the house is mine. I never agreed. I set the phone down and turned off notifications. Tomorrow, I would face Darren in person, Florence by my side, and the will already rewritten. We met at a quiet cafe on the corner of Pine and Alder, the kind with chipped mugs and polite music that knew when to stay in the background. I arrived first. Florence sat to my left, papers already in order, her posture as composed as ever. Darren came in 5 minutes late. His eyes tired, his shirt untucked in a way that told me he hadn't slept or hadn't stopped defending someone who didn't deserve it. He sat across from me without greeting, just dropped his elbows onto the table and said, "They're humiliated." I folded my hands in my lap. "I'm not responsible for their assumptions. You could have told us," he said, voice low. "We were all planning." "No," I interrupted. "Leora was planning. You were permitting." He blinked at that, the words slicing deeper than he expected. Florence cleared her throat gently and slid the envelope across the table. Darren looked at it without touching it. "What's that?" "My will," I said. "Updated." His lips parted slightly like he was about to object, but hadn't decided on which angle. I gave him no space for theatrics. "You're not removed," I said, "but you are deferred." He frowned. "You'll still be considered." Florence clarified, but contingent on a review clause, Lorraine included. "She's retaining full discretion." Darren looked at me, then really looked. For the first time in a long while, he saw the woman who had raised him, not the version edited down for convenience. His face softened for just a breath. And then the pride came back in. "Leora's going to say I didn't fight hard enough." "You didn't," I said. "But you still have time to learn." He didn't reply, just stared at the envelope still unopened. I rose from my seat and set my napkin down. "You can read it when you're ready, but I suggest you do it alone." Outside, the clouds were finally breaking. I stepped into the light breeze and didn't look back. The next morning, my building manager buzzed me. Leora was downstairs with a man in a gray suit and a thin leather briefcase. Garvin Voight was already waiting in the Willow Haven lobby when I arrived. He stood beside the security desk, arms folded, watching Leora and her lawyer with that dry composure only HOA presidents could master. "Ms. Grayston," he said, nodding to me, "we've intercepted an attempt to access your unit using a resident override code." Leora turned, her smile polished but tight. "We just want to resolve this like adults." The man beside her, early 40s, slick hair, expensive shoes, stepped forward. "Ms. Grayston." "I represent Mrs. Grayston in a matter of family property transition. My client was under the impression that she and her relatives were already residents of the unit." "She was misinformed," I said. "And no transition has taken place. The home is mine. There has been no transfer, written or implied." I handed Garvin the updated paperwork. Maya had prepared notarized documents, reaffirming my sole ownership restrictions on guest access and a digital lock reset order. Leora's face hardened as she read the first page. "You're locking us out of your life," she said softly. "No," I replied. "I'm locking the door to my home. My life was never yours to organize." The lawyer began to say something about undue hardship, but Garvin cut him off. "This is a private residential community. Without owner approval, your client has no standing." Leora looked past me toward the building's mezzanine windows, where the corner of the garden terrace peeked into view. She had already imagined her family sipping wine up there, no doubt claiming the space as if it had always belonged to them. Now, all she could do was watch it from outside. I thanked Garvin, turned and rode the elevator up in silence. When the doors opened, I stepped into my apartment alone. I brewed tea, sat in my favorite chair, and opened my sketchbook for the first time in weeks. The front gate camera pinged once, briefly showing Leora's car reversing down the drive. The next 2 days passed quietly until I saw a number I didn't recognize flash across my phone screen and a soft voice leave me a message I hadn't expected. The voicemail was short, hesitant. "Hi, Ms. Grayston. This is Kalia. I know this is strange, but I wanted to say I'm sorry, and thank you. If you're willing to talk, I'd like to explain." I sat with the message for an hour before calling back. She answered on the first ring. "Thank you," she said, almost breathless. Her voice was nothing like Leora's lower, softer without the edges. She didn't sound like someone accustomed to demanding space. "I didn't want to come," she began. "Leora told us you insisted. She made it sound like you were offering the place as a family gesture. She said you didn't want to live alone." I stayed quiet. "I should have known better," Kalia said, "but I didn't want to argue with her again. She always gets her way." She told me about the pressure, about how her parents had been following Leora's plans for years now, how decisions were made without discussion. "I lost my marriage trying to keep the peace," she admitted, "and then she promised me a room in a house that wasn't hers." "She lied to you," I said gently, "just like she lied to me." "I'm not like her," she said quickly. "I don't want anything from you. I wanted you to know." For a long moment, neither of us said anything. It felt like we were both sorting through pieces that didn't quite fit anymore. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "And for apologizing. That takes more courage than most people ever show." We said goodbye quietly. There were no promises, no invitations, just something released. Afterward, I took a slow walk through the neighborhood, letting the breeze move through me. The trees had started to turn gold, pushing through the edges of summer. I watched a mother and daughter laugh on a bench beneath a cedar. They reminded me of years I had once treasured and years I had survived. When I got home, I found an envelope slid under my door. My name was written in Darren's handwriting, small, uneven, as if he didn't know how to begin. The envelope was unsealed. Inside, just a single page. No formal greeting, no apologies spelled out in flowery language. Darren had written in pencil the way he used to when he was little, afraid of getting something wrong. "Mom, I see it now. I'm sorry for letting other people decide what you were allowed to keep. I don't expect anything. I just hope one day we can talk again." There was no signature. Just a folded crease worn from where he must have reopened it, hesitated, then folded it back again. I read it once, then again. Then I placed it in the drawer beneath my journals, not forgotten, but not ready for display either. It had been 7 weeks since the day I stepped away from what they assumed I would surrender. The house was no longer a battlefield. It had become a rhythm, quiet, breathable mine. I spent mornings in the sunroom tending to the ferns I planted along the terrace wall. They were finally taking root, green curling toward the sunlight without apology. The smell of fresh soil and citrus drifted into the kitchen where Earl Grey steeped next to my open sketchbook. I'd returned to drawing landscapes at first, then strange, dreamlike shapes that bloomed into something softer than precision. I wasn't trying to impress anymore. My calendar had filled in new ways. A book club on Wednesdays. Walks with Florence on Sunday afternoons. A call with Maya every other Friday, not about legal paperwork, just life. I kept the second bedroom empty. No guests, no just-in-cases. Just a room of stillness and lavender, always clean, always closed. Leora hadn't reached out again. Darren hadn't followed up. And I hadn't chased either of them. That wasn't grief. That was clarity. In the afternoons, I'd open the terrace doors and sit with a blanket across my lap, letting the wind slip through the house. No voices argued over who belonged. No footsteps rearranged my space. Just light. Just air. This wasn't just the place where I lived. It was where I finally remembered who I was.